Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to making sense of a world that just never stops moving.
Absolutely.
Today, we're really zeroing in on just 48 hours, September 1st and 2nd, 2025.
Right.
And this wasn't just any couple of days. It felt like a moment where you saw these huge geopolitical moves, heartbreaking humanitarian crises getting worse, and some really intense policy fights right here at home, all kind of boiling over at once.
Yeah, real convergence.
Exactly. So we've got a stack of sources, AP, Reuters, Financial Times, some online reports too. We're going to try and pull out the most crucial bits for you.
Connect the dots.
Connect the dots, find maybe some surprising facts, and just help you get that bigger picture, make it click.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's jump right in. First up, the geopolitical chessboard. We're looking at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO meeting in Tianjin, China.
Right, the SEO.
Now, it's been around, founded by China and Russia, brought in India, others, usually focused on, security, economics.
Standard stuff mostly.
But on September 1st, 2025, something really felt, different. President Xi Jinping got up there and basically framed the SCO as the core of a new world order.
An alternative order.
Yeah, specifically aimed at the global south. And his message was pretty pointed by, resist hegemonism.
Which everyone reads as pushback against the U.S., essentially.
Totally. And what was really interesting, maybe even a bit surprising, was seeing Putin and India's Modi right there, visibly backing him up. Putin actually called Modi a dear friend. And the three of them had these significant bilateral talks. It looked very deliberate.
And what's really compelling there is that pledge they made to be partners, not rivals, especially, like you said, with U.S. trade threats hanging over them.
Right.
India had just gotten hit with those big tariffs over Russian oil. So this isn't just talk, It feels like a real acceleration, a push to decouple from Western systems.
So what does that look like, decoupling?
Well, think about it. A proposed SKO development bank, an AI center. These aren't just symbols. They're aiming for real financial and tech coordination.
Yeah.
Less reliance on the dollar, more work on AI, even space cooperation. It's about building their own tracks, their own systems.
Yeah, building parallel structures. You could really see it.
Yeah.
And the optics, wow, a big show of unity among these non-Western powers. Plus, plans for a huge Chinese military parade later that week. And get this, North Korea's Kim Jong-un flew to Beijing.
To attend with Xi and Putin.
Exactly, standing shoulder to shoulder.
Right.
Talk about a united front.
That sends a message.
Oh, yeah. And the reaction was immediate. Taiwan saw the parade plans as direct intimidation.
Understandable.
Western officials started worrying, that this tighter China-Russia-India thing could weaken sanctions on Moscow, make it harder to isolate Putin.
Undercuts their strategy.
And the markets. They noticed. Big time. People were seeing it as a major step in global fragmentation, a new phase for Eurasia, challenging that whole Western-led economic setup we've had for decades. It feels like a real power shift happening.
It really does.
Yeah.
It's not just forming a bloc. They're actively trying to redefine global leadership. When we talk decoupling, we're talking independent finance, independent tech.
Right.
This is a long game to shift the world's center of gravity. And for you, listening, it means you might need to anticipate a world with maybe multiple economic spheres, different rules, different alliances. It's a very conscious reshaping.
Okay, from those huge geopolitical shifts, let's turn to something incredibly serious and just heartbreaking, the situation in Gaza.
Yeah, a very difficult subject.
I mean, since Israel's offensive started after the Hamas attacks in October 2023, we've seen mass casualties, displacement, terrible shortages, food, water, medicine, and the international legal pressure had already been building through 2024, 2025.
It had steadily.
Then, September 1st, 2025, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, the IAGS, a major academic group, they passed a resolution.
Okay.
And they basically said that Israel's actions meet the criteria of the UN Genocide Convention.
That's a heavy statement from academics.
It really is. It's not a court, but it adds serious academic weight to all the pressure building up.
Yeah.
And the same day, Israeli tanks pushed further into Gaza City, more airstrikes, more civilians killed. Aid groups were pleading for corridors, talking about deepening famine, just unprecedented suffering.
It's awful.
Israel, meanwhile, flatly rejected the genocide claims, called it misinformation, said they're acting in self-defense against Hamas. But that IAGS declaration, it just fueled the global debate. Some governments called for investigations. Others stood by Israel. You saw that polarization continue.
And it really raises a key question, doesn't it? What's the actual impact, legally, humanitarily when a body like the IAGS makes such a formal accusation.
Right. They're scholars, not politicians.
Exactly. They don't have enforcement power, but their declaration carries this significant moral and intellectual force. It kind of compels international forums to grapple with these claims more directly. It could influence investigations, influence debates on enforcing humanitarian law, maybe even more than official statements sometimes do. For you, it just highlights how intense that legal battlefront has become alongside the military one.
A truly devastating picture. And sticking with human suffering, those same days, September 1st and 2nd, were a brutal reminder of natural disasters, often hitting places already struggling with conflict or climate change. We saw terrible events across Asia.
Yeah, it's escalating.
In Afghanistan, September 1st, a magnitude 6 earthquake hit the east. That area is prone to quakes, infrastructure is weak, emergency services are limited. It's just a really tough situation after decades of conflict.
Already fragile.
Exactly. And the numbers climbed fast. Initial reports were bad, but it ended up being at least 1,100 killed, over 3,500 injured, thousands of homes just gone.
Oh, terrible.
The Taliban authorities asked for international help, but getting aid in was, well, a nightmare. Damaged roads, instability, sanctions getting in the way, logistics problems, donor fatigue. It all piled up.
A perfect storm of obstacles.
Yeah. Economists warned it would just make Afghanistan's poverty worse. Rights groups were pushing hard, saying, look, separate the aid from the politics, get help to the people.
And it's such a tragic example of how these disasters don't happen in isolation, right?
Agree.
They crash right into these existing man-made crises.
Absolutely.
And, linking back to geopolitics, these fragile states become these testing grounds for whether the world can actually cooperate on humanitarian aid or not. The sanctions on Afghanistan, even during an earthquake, that shows how political decisions can accidentally create these secondary humanitarian disasters. It makes you really think about the unintended impacts of broad sanctions on, well, the most vulnerable people.
That's a really important point. And a similarly grim situation was unfolding in Sudan. September 1st to 2nd, a whole mountainside collapsed in Jebel Mara.
Wiped out a village.
Wiped out the village of Tarsin. Over 1,000 people killed, according to the Sudan Liberation Movement Army. And this is on top of one of the world's worst humanitarian crises already.
Driven by the civil war.
Right. The war between the army and the RSF has just shattered the country, especially places like Darfur and Kordofan. Services are gone. And here's the climate link. Heavier seasonal rains because of climate stress are causing worse floods and landslides now, partly because the governance has collapsed.
It's that awful combination again, civil war, no real authority, and then these intense climate-driven disasters hit.
Yeah.
The landslide in Tarsin is just a horrific result of that mix. Aid groups can barely get in because of the fighting and insecurity. They're warning about disease. Huge numbers of people displaced long-term. It's not just a natural disaster. It's like a conflict climate catastrophe.
Conflict climate catastrophe. That sums it up.
And the fact it happened right when Sudan had to shut down an oil field because of drone attacks, it just shows how tangled these crises are. For you listening, it's not just some faraway tragedy. It's a really stark look at how systems fail governance, climate response, conflict resolution all at once.
Okay, let's pivot now to the United States. The start of September here saw some major policy battles and shifts really coming to a head. Immigration, for one.
Yeah.
Enforcement has been, back and forth for years. Cities are struggling with new arrivals. Shelter systems are overloaded.
A constant challenge.
So on Labor Day, September 1st, 2025, you had thousands marching in Chicago, other cities. They were protesting potential new ICE operations, talk of using the National Guard for immigration enforcement.
And pushing for wages, too.
Yeah, also demanding better wages, workplace protections. But then came this big federal move. President Trump announced the Washington, D.C. Police Department was being put under federal control.
Federal control, wow.
Yeah. National Guard troops, federal officers deployed. And the administration hinted similar things could happen in other cities with rising crime.
Okay, that's a huge step. That really touches on fundamental questions about governance, civil liberties.
For sure.
Putting local police under federal control, basically bypassing local government, that immediately set off legal challenges, huge protests. Supporters said, look, it's necessary for crime. Opponents called it a straight-up attack on civil liberties, federal overreach.
Shape divisions.
Massive divisions. It really challenges the whole idea of federalism, that balance between federal and local power. For you, it's about watching how that balance might be shifting, and the precedent it sets is pretty significant.
A really big precedent. And related, on the immigration front, a federal judge did step in to temporarily stop that Trump administration policy trying to deport hundreds of Guatemalan kids from shelters or foster care.
Okay, so some pushback there.
Yeah, affecting over 600 kids who'd fled violence. Shows those legal battles are ongoing. Then, beyond immigration, there were these major challenges to, like, fundamental economic governance. Fed independence, for example.
Always a sensitive point.
Central bank independence is usually seen as, a cornerstone. But Trump's first term had clashes with the Fed, and in 2025, a new fight blew up over his attempt to remove Governor Lisa Cook.
Citing mortgage issues, right, which she denied.
Exactly, claims she flatly denies. And as of September 1st, no court had okayed her removal, and she was suing to stop it.
This is way more than just about one person, though. It's seen as a direct challenge to the Fed's independence itself.
Right.
You had the ECB president, Christine Lagarde, warning that messing with the Fed politically could pose systemic risks globally. Economists started flagging the dangers, policymakers getting scared to act, maybe higher borrowing costs for the U.S., rate setting becoming political.
Yeah, huge potential impacts.
It could even push Congress to try and pass laws to better protect the Fed. It's a really serious question about the integrity of an institution that's meant to be non-political. And that has real potential consequences for your investments, for overall economic stability.
Absolutely. And speaking of public institutions under pressure, let's look at public health. The CDC had a rough 2025 leadership changes, funding battles.
Yeah, a lot of turmoil.
And things really heated up after HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. started pushing for vaccine policy changes, and then the administration removed the CDC director, Susan Monterez.
And Kennedy Jr. was already controversial because of his vaccine skepticism.
Very much so. So on September 1st, 9 former CDC directors actually published this open warning.
9 of them.
9 former directors, saying Kennedy's actions, firings, shaking up advisory groups, cutting programs were actively undermining national health security, especially for vulnerable people. They specifically praised Monterez for resisting policies they felt weren't backed by science.
That's a powerful statement from people who've been in that seat.
It is.
And this isn't just office politics. It really risks becoming a crisis of public trust in health institutions, right when you need that trust most.
Exactly.
Public health leaders were calling for Congress to step in, worried that politicizing the CDC would just slow down responses to outbreaks, make vaccine hesitancy worse, especially with, flu season and other respiratory viruses coming in the fall. For you, it raises tough questions about, well, how do we protect scientific integrity inside government, particularly when we face future health threats?
Yeah, really critical questions. Okay, wrapping up the U.S. domestic scene, 2 other big policy shifts from the Trump administration hit on September 1st. First, the president unilaterally ended collective bargaining rights for over 1 million federal workers.
Well, just ended them.
Yep. Unions sued immediately, obviously, but agencies started killing existing contracts. Labor groups, Democrats called it a direct attack on labor rights.
A huge move against federal unions.
And second, remember that de minimis rule allowed small packages, $800 or less, into the U.S. duty-free.
Yeah. Right, online shopping and stuff.
That ended by September 1st. Customs started collecting tariffs on all those small parcels. Foreign postal services started restricting shipments to the U.S. So immediately, higher costs, delays for consumers, for small businesses.
But the idea was to level the playing field.
That was the argument, yeah. Level the playing field for U.S. companies, stop illicit goods. But still, a pretty profound change impacting millions of people buying things online. Okay, let's shift gears now. Look at the global economy. China first. After a bit of a rocky 2024, Beijing was trying to stabilize housing and boost manufacturing in 2025.
Right, trying to get things back on track.
On September 1st, a private survey, a PMI, showed factory activity actually grew at the fastest pace in 5 months.
Okay, some positive signs then.
Some tentative signs, yeah.
Right.
It seemed like demand and output were improving a bit, probably helped by some targeted stimulus and credit loosening.
But tentative is the key word, right? It's important for you, listening, to get the nuance here. The recovery looked uneven. Consumers were still pretty cautious that property market stress was still lingering. And then you add in supply chain shifting, trade friction, new U.S. trade actions.
Yeah.
The risks for Chinese exports were still quite high. So yeah, a little improvement, but definitely not smooth sailing ahead.
Not smooth sailing at all. And speaking of turbulence, let's talk Tesla. 2025 was rough for them. More competition in China, the EV market in Europe getting more mature, price pressure everywhere.
Yeah, headwinds from multiple directions.
So on September 1st, Tesla cut the price of the long-range Model 3 in China. And that same day, data came out showing August sales in some European countries just plummeted, like down 84% in Sweden.
84%, wow.
Yeah, extending the slide they'd been on for months.
These moves really highlight the pressure on their profit margins, don't they?
Yeah.
And just how fiercely they have to fight to keep market share against rivals like BYD in China, but also the legacy automakers stepping up their game.
So price wars.
Pretty much. For you, it signals that the global EV market is maturing fast. Price wars could become the norm, which might mean cheaper EVs for buyers, but also intense pressure on the car makers themselves.
Definitely something to watch if you're in the market for an EV. Okay, a brighter spot for one Asian economy, South Korea. On September 1st, their trade ministry reported record monthly semiconductor exports.
Record high. How much?
21 trillion, which is roughly 15 billion US dollars, up nearly a third compared to the year before.
That's huge. What's driving it?
Mostly the global hunger for AI chips and advanced electronics. It gave a real boost to South Korea's stock market jobs.
But there's always a but, isn't there? For you, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Great for Korea's economy now, but it also ramps up trade tensions with competitors and raises those old concerns about being too reliant on just one, albeit booming, sector.
Okay, finally, let's just quickly touch on a few other diverse headlines from around the world that caught our eye from those first 2 days of September.
Sure. What else happened?
In Mexico, September 1st, Claudia Sheinbaum, the country's first woman president, gave her first big State of the Nation address.
Right. First in form.
She talked about progress navigating that tricky relationship with the U.S. under Trump, highlighted some judicial reforms, claimed some domestic wins.
How was the tone?
Kind of a mix, really. Assertive about Mexican sovereignty, but also pragmatic about needing economic integration. Markets, diplomats were all trying to read the signals, on cartel violence, energy policy, border stuff. Businesses want clarity on investment rules.
So for you listening, it's about watching how Mexico handles that really complex relationship with its big northern neighbor and how Sheinbaum tries to balance domestic priorities with all those international pressures.
And two other stories that sort of reflect this tightening global mood on migration. First, the UK. On September 1st, the government just suspended processing family reunion applications for refugees.
Suspended them completely?
Yep, suspended. Part of a tougher line, they said, pending a bigger overhaul of the rules. The government framed it as necessary to cut down on illegal crossings.
But critics,
legal groups slammed the humanitarian cost. They warned it could just push more desperate people towards dangerous routes, increase trafficking risks.
Really difficult trade-off.
And similarly, Australia and Nauru finalized a deal also on September 1st. Australia will basically pay Nauru to take foreign-born criminals that Australia kicks out. They'd be sent to Nauru for detention or maybe resettlement.
Offshore processing for criminals, essentially.
Yeah. Human rights groups immediately condemned it, warning about potential abuse, lack of oversight. The Australian government called it a pragmatic solution. So again, you see these really tough, controversial choices nations are making about migration and who gets to stay.
Wow. Okay, that was quite a journey through just 2 days, September 1st and 2nd, 2025.
It really was a lot packed in.
We covered those ambitious geopolitical moves trying to reshape the world order with the SCO.
The absolutely urgent humanitarian crises in Gaza, Afghanistan, Sudan, showing that terrible mix of conflict, climate change, and aid challenges.
Right, those intersections.
And then these really complex policy fights here in the U.S. over federal power, the Fed, public health trust, worker rights, trade. It was a lot.
And if you try to, connect it all to the bigger picture, what stands out is just how incredibly fast things can change, globally, locally.
Yeah.
And you really see these deep, sometimes unexpected connections between things that seem separate.
Right.
A policy fight in D.C. ripples into global markets. Climate change makes old conflicts even worse. It makes everything much more complex.
Absolutely. So what does all this mean for you trying to navigate this world that's changing so fast, so profoundly?
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But understanding these connections, we think, is really key to making sense of it all. As we watch these new alliances take shape and maybe old policies start to crumble, maybe the thought to leave you with is this. How much will global stability actually depend on our ability to understand and maybe even bridge these worldviews that seem to be getting further apart instead of just reacting after the fact?
That's the big question.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time.